Welcome everyone. I'm so excited to be here and get a chance to talk about some controversial marketing opinions. I'll have to be honest, I was thrilled when I got asked to moderate this panel because I love the concept of things that are a little controversial in marketing. So just to start off a little bit about myself, I am the Director of Brand and Content at Climacell, which is the weather intelligence platform. We help companies like Uber, the NFL, and Fox Sports understand how weather impacts their business and adapt accordingly. And I want to also introduce our panelists today. Let's start with you, Jess. If you could please take the stage now.
Great. Hi, my name is Jess Iandiorio, and I run marketing at Starburst. We are a Series B company now, and we help people get access to their data anywhere for analytics. And we do that by supporting an open source technology called Presto, which allows people to access data wherever it is versus having to move it somewhere to get it ready for analysis. So yeah, Series B, running marketing, first marketer hired January this year, and it's been an adventure over the last 9 months.
Amazing. Nicole, I would love it if you could introduce yourself next.
Sure. Hi, I'm Nicole Canula, and I am the head of marketing at Dust Identity. Dust Identity is a startup. We are a Series A company, and we're in the B2B space. We do supply chain security and hardware authentication. I was also the first marketing hire at Dust Identity.
Love seeing the first marketing hires represented. And Chris, could you introduce yourself as well?
Great, thanks, Kara. My name is Chris Bondas. I'm the head of marketing at Patient Ping. We're a Series C. We raised $100 million. We recently announced that. And what we do is we coordinate care across hospitals, health systems, skilled nursing facilities, home health agencies, and health insurance companies to give and improve better patient outcomes. I was the first head of marketing hired at Patient Ping last August. There was a small marketing team already in place there, but I was the first executive leader of that. So excited to be here, excited to talk to you guys all about marketing, some controversial topics that we have planned.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for being here and taking the time. So we're just going to jump into it. Like, let's get controversial. So I wanted to start off with this statement and see how you feel about it. Ungated content is overrated. Chris, what do you think about that statement?
So this is really timely. My team and I had this debate over the summer. We're trying to fill our funnel with leads, and from a marketing perspective, just to give you some context on me so you understand where my answers are coming from. If you think about marketing on a spectrum, on one side is the very creative individuals, on the other side is very heavily quant individuals. I probably lean more towards the quantitative side. So I have a background in market research and analysis, so that's where I tend to lean. And so when it comes to content creation and content offerings and promoting content, like I want to see the numbers, I want to see the downloads, I want to understand if this content is resonating with our individuals, because we're trying to build pipeline. And if your content is ungated, it's very hard to build pipeline, particularly in our industry where we're selling into the hospitals, we're selling into skilled nursing facilities and health insurance companies. So to me, being able to identify who downloads your content, score them appropriately from a lead scoring perspective, and then passing them along to a BDR team through that whole funnel process and that whole lead progression process is super important. I think some content can be ungated, sure, and not every content deserves a gate in front of it, but for the most part, I think it's overrated.
Great. And Nicole, what about you? How do you feel about gated versus ungated?
Yeah, I'd say that there's no hard and fast rule for every company. I think you have to look at it from your company size, your company vertical, and what stage you're at. For us at Dust Identity, we're just kind of testing the waters with some gated content. I think it's, again, you have to take it case by case and think about what's best for your company. And as Chris pointed out, if you have gated content, then the expectations are going to be higher. You need to make sure that when somebody is going to take the time to pass over their information and download that piece of content, that there's some value to it. Another best practice too is that I think the further along you are as a company in a later stage, you have a better idea who your target personas are. And I think that the more you know about your buyers and your personas, I think that gated content can be even more useful. So I think for an earlier stage company, it's not quite as critical. And I think it's a matter of just testing what works for you guys.
Love a little bit of nuance in the discussion for sure. What about you, Jess? How do you feel about this?
Yeah, I think when the no forums movement was starting to brew maybe 2 years ago, I had a visceral reaction to it because I don't work for, I work for enterprise software companies, and we have long sales cycles, and we need to bring those buyers in to pass them over to sales. But I agree that you have to be really thoughtful about how valuable the content is. But yeah, I think that there need to be forums when you're in this specific sector where you don't have a freemium product, or even if you have it and it's a heavier barrier to entry. I think you need to be thinking about forums and how to capture people's information, if for nothing else than to help them through the early experience. And I do think there's some very cool things coming out now, like the ability with Wistia to embed a forum partway through a video. And if we think more about trying to find technologies that allow us to give people exposure to the content to understand if they want it or not, and then serve them with the forum when you've got them, I think that's a win-win for everyone. You don't ask them to give you information before they know they want the content. So I'm looking forward to experimenting more with that type of technology to improve the experience.
I totally agree. I love the experience of, it's like semi-gated content with a Wistia video. But what about in terms of SEO? Because I feel like there is a lot of value in ungated content when it comes to building up SEO for your site.
Sure, absolutely. I can take that. I think it's everybody's made some really good points here too, and it's really important to remember like your vertical and what stage you're in, and who your target audience is and your persona as well. So if you are creating content for a very specific niche of buyer, having a great blog post, for example, or a series of blog posts with SEO keywords targeted toward them is super important. And I think there's tons of agencies out there that can help you with that if you don't have somebody on staff to do. We actually don't have an SEO expert on staff. We use an agency to supplement a lot of our work because we are a small marketing team. But like with keywords, and we can actually talk about this a little bit later too, you have to be careful to not cast your net too wide. Be basically a mile wide and an inch deep. You have to be very precise and very targeted at those keywords.
Definitely.
Anything to add to that, guys?
Yeah, we lost you a little bit at the end, but it's okay.
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. We all understand the Zoom struggle. We've all been there. But I think that's super interesting to note, actually, that of our panelists, everyone is at a different stage of growth. So we talked about this before, that we have a Series A, a Series B, and a Series C company today represented. And so I think that's something to note as well for all of your responses, is what stage is your company at. So wait, who is it that's A? It's you, Nicole, correct? Yes. So Nicole is Series A, Jess is Series B, and Chris is Series C. So keep that in mind as well as we continue this discussion. So anyone else want to jump in and add anything else about gated versus ungated?
I just think, along the lines of the SEO conversation, you have to reach no compromise on that. You can't compromise on SEO based on whether your firms are gated or not. So you just have to optimize your landing pages. And I think that's where you need to have all those critical keywords present. So you don't lose people just because you do need to eventually gate content.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too. Again, from the early stage perspective, is optimizing for SEO in the places that you can, that are, and this kind of moves into, I think, our next topic, but that are kind of no cost related, right? Like focusing on your landing pages and the content that you already have that's ungated.
Definitely. Yes. So going into our next topic, controversial opinion number 2, Google ads aren't worth the spend anymore. Nicole, it sounded like you had some strong opinions here.
Sure. So, I mean, it does say to me it's not something that we're currently investing in. Not to say that we won't. It's something that we're looking into and exploring. Like Chris, we don't have an in-house SEO team. So our team of 2 has been kind of looking into some of the best practices and exploring it. But I think it's, have to look at it based on the size of your company and your marketing budget. Do you have the spend for it? And then looking at your industry and what is the CPC for those words, is it something economical that you can invest in? And right now we haven't tested it, but I think with a lot of these a lot of these marketing tactics and strategies, there's the ability to test, which is great. And I think that's something that we might be doing in the shorter term. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah, Jess, what do you feel about Google Ads right now?
Well, I feel like this might upset anyone that works for a PR agency, but Google Ads to me could be like a bad PR agency that will take all of your money if you let them, and they will prove no ROI. I mean, I've had some bad experiences on both sides. So I think you need to be super cautious. And if you're spending blindly on broad keywords, that's not a good move, and Google will take all your money. I think if you're going to a new company and you're opening a playbook for Google, and you're not thinking about the context of that business or what stage of maturity that market is, that's a no-no. But what I find is it is still absolutely essential. And I think there are really smart ways to work with Google, whether you have a partner or not. And some of those are about competitive tactics. So right now we're doing some really interesting work analyzing our competitors and what they're doing and doing these takeover campaigns to steal traffic. And I find Google to be an excellent weapon in that quest. Past that, of course, you have your core words and you optimize those and you monitor the activity there. But you need to be really smart about how you utilize Google, or you will waste a ton of money, and they will be happy with you for that.
Yeah, they're certainly not going to stop you from wasting money on ads by any means. Chris, what about you? How have you kind of adapted your Google AdWords strategy over time?
Sure. So Google AdWords is in the repertoire, right? It's part of a channel that marketers need to be aware of and need to leverage. I think both Jess and Nicole gave good advice there. Like, you have to be careful. You have to do your research. You can spend a lot of money very quickly, and it'll go out the door. It's something that needs a lot of attention. That's why we use an agency to monitor our spend, and monitor our bidding strategy, monitor our keyword strategy. That's the other thing too. If you're in an industry that's very expensive to bid on, I come from an industry that we used to spend up to $50 a word or a click. And right now, though, that in my current industry, it's like less than $1, $2.50 at most. So that obviously influences your decision to use search and how much you use it. But I think it's definitely an important channel to leverage for marketers, and just get the additional help and set aside some budget to test first. And once you test, then determine to invest more or not. And I think Jess had a really good point too about competitive keywords. So we like to bid on our competitors' keywords themselves or their brand terms, because that shows that the person doing that is a qualified buyer more than not, because they're not bidding on it, or they're not searching or querying for a very broad topic. They're searching on a specific competitor. So by that, we know that they are in the market for our solution. So we've had good success there bidding on competitor brand terms.
Yeah. I want to add one more thing, because I'm not sure who shares this, but we have a unique challenge, which is that we're supporting an open source technology called Presto, which is a general word that anybody could use for a variety of things. Also happens to be a public transportation system in Canada. And then we have Starburst, which is our company name, and we all know Starburst candies. So we're dealing with some very core important words that are general. And what we had to do recently was we had a competitor that was launching, and we knew they were launching, and we knew we didn't want them to get any traffic. So we paid out the nose to protect our traffic and our position. And in that time period, I think we spent $7,000 or $8,000 with Google securing traffic, which was very low quality. But we accelerated our learning on what were the negative keywords we needed to implement so that traffic could become much higher quality. And even just in that 1 month period, the fact that we were able to come through that transition, our conversion has been much, much better since then. So we had a catalyzing moment where we just wanted to protect our brand. And then after that, it's actually yielded much higher leads from Google.
That's such a good point too about, I know that many startups struggle with, owning the name of their brand. And that's such a unique challenge for a lot of people. Even just naming your company something that will be able to earn unique traffic on Google is really hard sometimes. Does anyone else want to add anything additional about Google AdWords spend before we move on to number 3?
I would just say one more thing. Like, Google AdWords is actually a great resource, and Jess alluded to it as well. Like, you can see like the general level of queries and impressions that each keyword gets. You can use Google Trends as well to see, like, is your category that your company competes in, is that a hot category right now? That thing's trending upwards or downwards? So again, there's a lot of intelligence in Google, and you can leverage the platform for that. You don't necessarily have to be buying ads for it all the time, but you can certainly leverage the tools that they have for free.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm actually weirdly obsessed with looking at Google.
Yeah, I think we're playing back. I don't know. Can you hear me? I'm not sure if I was. I'm gonna talk because maybe people can hear me. No.
Go ahead.
We can hear you, Jess.
Okay. We've been back and forth between Google and LinkedIn, and now we have a balance between both, where we use Google for competitive tactics, general traffic on brand, but also intelligence, like Chris is saying. So we're learning about the market, we're learning about trends, who's searching for what increasingly, and identifying opportunities for us to be successful with thought leadership. LinkedIn is where we're going for super targeted outreach to our target accounts, and that spend, when very specific, is actually more efficient than Google for us.
Yeah, that's definitely really interesting to compare. Yeah, more of that kind of account-based marketing style ad on LinkedIn versus more of a broad ad strategy on Google. Definitely something to consider. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, right now, and maybe this is a Series B thing, but LinkedIn is our ABM platform. We don't have another technology we're utilizing yet. We're close, but that's what we're using.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Yeah, I'll second that too. That LinkedIn is just really improved over the years with their targeting. It still might be slightly expensive compared to other platforms out there from an advertising perspective, but we're seeing really, really strong results trying to identify specific niche audiences and types of titles in these health systems, in these payer accounts. So it definitely complements your ABM strategy for sure. And it can get expensive quickly, but so far the ROI is worked.
I'm sure people at LinkedIn would be thrilled to hear us saying that.
Yeah, and I'm just going to circle back to our forums. Sorry, our forums conversation earlier with LinkedIn's new features where you can embed a form inside an ad. It just removes all of the friction for someone who wants an asset, and so it's yet another way to think about optimizing forms, target account engagement, etc.
Yeah, very good point. So on to number 3, controversial opinion. Building your email database is all that matters. So Jess, you want to give us your thoughts on email database ownership?
So I think that there are old tactics like buying lists and syndicating content that are all about building your email database. And it's natural when you start early and there's darkness in the database to think that's one of the core ways I'm going to go and build. I think a much better way than focusing just on building for the sake of having people to talk to is work with sales to get target accounts established and then find programs that are going to find those people where they are. And those might be more expensive and lower volume, but you'd rather not start from a point of paying whatever your service provider is for too many contacts that you're not actually marketing to. You should start from a point of quality if you can, if you're early. And so, I don't think at all about the number of contacts in the database. I think about how many contacts and target accounts we're able to, and can we improve upon that? And I also think you don't really know who your target accounts are, your audience. You might have a good guess, but you also might be wrong. So you have to be a little bit opportunistic and allow people to come in organically who are interested in you and analyze that and learn about that before you're paying too much money to build a fake database.
Yeah, you can have a database full of garbage for sure. Nicole, what do you think about?
Yeah, on that note, I mean, I'd have to agree wholeheartedly. Quality over quantity, particularly for a smaller company. One great example is a lot of times you exhibit at a trade show and a marketer's role is to how many leads can they capture on that show floor. And we did our first big event earlier this year, a big security show, RSA, and it wasn't about just scanning every badge. In fact, unless they wanted to, we didn't even insist on scanning every badge because we wanted to scan the ones that mattered. Filling our database with a bunch of names that we don't have the time or the resources to properly nurture and sort through isn't a good use of our time. So it's really quantity over quality for us, and trying to make sure that our sales team, which is still on the smaller side and growing, that we're handing over the leads that are really qualified and not just filling it with garbage, as you said.
Yes, I'm always very polite about these things. Chris, how do you feel about the importance of building your database?
I think it's critical. It becomes part of that flywheel effect, and it's really nurturing your customers. We have a BDR function at Patient Ping too that is, just to repeat myself, I thought there was a little bit of trouble there. We have a BDR function in Patient Ping that does both inbound follow-up as well as outbound prospecting, and that database is critical for them. And there's definitely ways to, we talked a little bit about trade shows, we talked a little bit about content syndication to build up that database, but there's also third parties out there, like ZoomInfo is another one that can really help you kind of build up your database very quickly. But I really stress with what everybody else has said, like the quality is so important, and it can be filled up with trash really, really quickly. And so just using a service like ZoomInfo, using your BDRs can really help keep that database clean and effective for you. Because I think marketers need to continue to email. People say email's dead or dying. I just don't think that's true. I think it's a critical aspect for us as marketers to continue our reach and continue our nurturing of our prospects and our customer base, and they have good solid offers.
Yeah, definitely. And I definitely think that the point you made about like email is not dead. That's still an owned channel. And I think there's been so much discussion about if you're building your audience on a channel that you don't own, that you can't control it, and you can't, you could be at risk of, experiencing what, say, happened to anyone that really poured a lot of resources into developing their Facebook business page, for example. So that's always a risk.
I think on what Chris said, I'll tell a story for a second to articulate a little bit about the list building and the importance of quality. So we started off the year, again, first marketer, but a few months in, COVID hit, and I had hired our first marketer who was an events person, and of course events go away. And so now we're at this interesting moment where she's transitioned flawlessly into digital events, but we needed something else. We needed to drive volume. Our sales team had already been hired roughly. And we had this sort of absolute blessing of being able to have 3 of our co-founders author a book, an O'Reilly book. And these are highly technical manuals that you don't really want unless you actually intend to use that technology. And we were able to be the digital sponsor of that. So we went from darkness, no one on the team, no leads, to since then we've brought in almost 4,000 leads just on that book alone. And these are very qualified because this is Presto, the definitive guide. It's all about this open source technology I mentioned earlier. So we had this really happy problem of too much volume almost and qualified, but we were capturing personal emails. And so we start getting feedback from sales. We're overwhelmed. It's taking too much time. We don't know who these people are. And that accelerated us into ZoomInfo. So because ZoomInfo can append where it can take that personal email and turn it into the business contact information. We have since gone and restricted our forms to business emails as we navigated that time period because it was too high of a volume. Now we're loosening them up again. But I do think, you have to be mindful about all of these things you're trying to do at once, and, building a marketable universe is important. But if the quality either of the person or the contact data sucks, you really have to quickly solve for that. And I do think ZoomInfo is an awesome partner in that quest too.
Yeah, love that. It's great advice. Anything else we want to add about email list building before we move on to number 4? Okay, that was apparently not as controversial as we thought. So controversial opinion number 4. Your first marketing hire should be able to do it all. Nicole, do you want to take that one since you are early stage? I feel like this is a great one for you.
Sure. Yeah. So and we're looking at this from who is my first hire versus who the founder or a CEO should first hire, right? Could be
Sure.
both, right? Yeah. Well, and I guess once you think about it, so I was the first hire, and I know something that was I had done some pre-existing like contracting work with our CEO and founder, and I think if you're looking at it from that perspective, I think finding somebody that you trust is really, really critical, because it's, you know, you're working with them to kind of from the very start of your marketing team and building the foundation. So I think that's really critical if you're looking at it from that early stage. In terms of my first hire, it wasn't about finding someone who could do it all. It was about finding someone who could complement my skills. So I had a lot of strengths in specific areas, and if we were going to be running as a small lean team, I had to find somebody else who could complement me and help out with some of the things that were not kind of where my strong suits were. So I think that is like what I would say is like the number one thing to think about.
Yeah, that's a great point. Chris, did you want to add anything?
Sure. So being a Series C, it's a little bit different, I would imagine, than a Series A startup. When I joined Patient Ping, we had a small marketing team in place already. They were predominantly generalists, though. Like they weren't a specialist in a particular marketing area. But I think what's interesting is we've gone through these topics already. We talked about ungated content. We talked about forms. We talked about Google Ads. We talked about LinkedIn forms. We talked about building your email database. And so what we really are doing is orchestrating a bunch of different marketing activity. And to me, the person that's critical as a hire is the marketing operations person. So my first hire at Patient Ping was our marketing operations manager. We needed to upgrade our database. We needed to upgrade our marketing automation platform because we want to build this repeatable, scalable, predictable marketing engine. And without a solid marketing ops person, it's really, really hard to do. So that may be different for a Series A or even a Series B. But for us, as we try to approach scale, marketing operations is critical. They need to understand, you know, lead scoring. They need to understand all the different form technologies and like maybe do some progressive profiling. They need to understand how the systems integrate with Salesforce or whatever the CRM is. So to me, like the marketing ops person is really the backbone of the department, and like they're not really highly visible, but behind the scenes they work a lot of their magic, and it's critical to the company.
Definitely true. Unsung heroes of marketing is marketing ops by far.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Jess, what would you like to add?
Well, I would say I failed at marketing ops hiring soon enough in other roles. I don't know that I would agree that it's like first critical hire. I do think that comes back to your market and maturity. And if you're in maybe a smaller market where you're not dealing with that much volume, you can struggle through for a little while. It's not ideal, but I agree they're absolutely essential. But I've hired too late in the past, and that's been a big problem. I personally look for people who can be dangerous and want to be dangerous across all disciplines of marketing. This is my fifth startup. I work for young companies. I build teams, and then typically we do have expertise in functions very quickly. But I do in my first hire look for like a core skill plus a flex skill at a minimum. So hiring a demand gen person who can flex in content might sound like a unicorn, but those people exist, you know, or vice versa. Or hiring an events person who can flex in general demand gen. These are things that I'm looking for, because I think you just don't know enough when you start at a young company about what's going to be required on the day. And maybe events are a big opportunity, and maybe COVID screws that. You just don't know. So you have to hire smart, good marketers initially, who have depth in a specific area you think will be important, but can flex easily and understand the nature of needing to flex and are, you know, open to that.
I love that idea of having some depth in specific areas, but the ability to flex, because I think that's crucial. And you want to avoid someone who's just, I'd say, complete generalist if it's going to be, you know, a small lean team, because you need people that are going to really dig into all of these areas. And if someone can come in and have depth in a specific area, I think that's critical.
I think a key trait in any person in a startup environment, Series A, B, C, D, what have you, is that their willingness to grind and like grind through, because a lot of things can change in a startup world. You can zig and zag very quickly. And if somebody wants to stay in their swim lane and just do their one job in their little box, like that's not going to work. And, you know, the grinding aspect and the perseverance and the persistence of trying to figure something out, it's not going to be perfect, right? Like, we need you to figure this out from scratch. Finding that person with that ability to kind of think creatively, think critically, and do so with a positive attitude, and not want things handed to them is absolutely essential.
Yeah.
I love that. We talk about that at Climacella, if like nobody says that's not my job.
Yeah.
You can't have that mentality.
Yeah. I always tell people, like, I just want you to bring your brain. That's what I want you to bring. You're smart, you're a marketer, and you know, every problem and scenario is going to be slightly different than what you've seen before. So, you know, be open to doing new things, trying to learn yourself, going on and self-educating. The best marketers who've worked for me are those who are really good at self-educating and have no problem rolling up their sleeves, figuring out the new thing.
Yeah, just to build on what Nicole said earlier too about not looking for a specialist, or sorry, looking for a generalist right away. I think there's agencies that can certainly help with different functions that can get you stood up much faster. So like outsourcing your PR, outsourcing your SEM, outsourcing your creative design. Those are all areas where I think you can get away with doing that with a contractor or a different agency. But you need to have those core marketing people on your team that you hold close to your heart, or you hold close to your team, because you just don't want them to, you don't want to outsource those critical functions.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And when it comes to PR and communications, particularly, I think, or external comms and PR, I think that a contractor is a great solution for a small company, because it's a lot of times lower cost investment than an agency, and they can sometimes, depending on the relationship that you have with them, become kind of a part-time member of that team, so they can invest more of their time and resources and get a little bit deeper into your subject matter of your organization, versus an agency sometimes is running in a lot of directions. And if you're a small company with a low budget, the quality may not be quite as good.
And so we did actually get a question from the audience about this topic, asking, I think is like a classic question of, how do I get hired at a startup? So, you know, I feel like that's advice everyone always wants. So I don't know if you could give one piece of advice from someone who you would hire.
So right now we don't have a lot of job openings listed. However, we have made more than one hire in the last year for openings that aren't, you know, there's not an open job rec posted on our website or Breezy or anywhere. So I would say be, you know, somewhat aggressive and reach out if you see a company that you're genuinely interested in, and you can share the reason why and what you could add to that team. You may not even recognize that there's an opportunity there for you. And especially these like small growing companies, like we're constantly growing and evolving. And even if you don't see something open, it's very likely that we're still looking and we need to grow our teams.
I think it depends on the person who asked, I mean, where your context is. Are you right out of school, or are you a little bit further into your career? So I think your approach to getting into a startup varies based on your context. But the one constant is awesome attitudes for people that are willing to grind and are excited about the opportunity. I think, you know, what Chris was saying earlier, the grind is real with young companies. They're like babies, and they take a lot of nurturing. They're very high maintenance and demanding, and it's not for everybody. So if you want to work at a startup, you should understand it's going to take more than working in a specific role at a large company. And it's going to take at times longer hours. And so the people who are hiring, or I'll just speak for myself, are looking for people with awesome, positive attitudes who are super excited about the opportunity to accelerate their learning and grow their careers, and are no task is too small people. And so I think that if you're young, sort of emphasize those qualities about yourself and your energy, and because it takes a lot of energy. So I'm looking for people with energy that are maybe younger in their career. And I think that positive attitude just goes so far. When you have a young team, you become like, you know, there's a hot topic about whether you're a family or not in a startup, but you do have family-like dynamics with very young, small teams. So you have to bring a lot to the table in terms of your attitude and your overall contribution. So attitude is everything. We all
I would add to that, just I would add one thing to that too, if about how do you stand out, right, from all the dozens, if not hundreds of other applicants that we're going to get. Show initiative, right? Just don't send another cover letter. Just don't send another resume. Do some interesting work about the company. Present some research about the company. Like, it doesn't have to be this long diatribe, just like a couple of slides, like, hey, I really enjoyed like meeting you, or I heard about your company. Here's some competitive analysis that might be interesting to you, right? That's how you stand out from the crowd and dozens and hundreds of resumes that we get. So again, just take initiative and try to stand out in a unique way.
And I would also add, we've made the point that working a startup is very different than working in a huge enterprise where your role is very defined. But I wouldn't say that we wouldn't welcome someone from that environment if they're interested in switching gears. I think it's just making sure that if you're coming from that large organization and you want to get into the startup community, it's about probably expressing that and showing the reason of why you want to make that switch, and that you are hungry and you have that attitude and you want to be a part of something young and growing and kind of build the foundation of it. But just to make sure that those who are coming from that type of background, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think there's a lot of value that they can also bring from that perspective as well.
Great. I'm sure our question, the person who asked that question is very pleased that we answered it, hopefully. So on to our fifth and final controversial topic before we do some dial-in questions. So controversial opinion, virtual events can be better than in-person events. Very relevant right now. Nicole, what do you think about virtual events?
Sure. So we're not hosting any virtual events at Dust Identity, but we are definitely participating in them. And for a smaller company, I mean, really any company, there are a lot of benefits in terms of the resources that you have to invest to attend an event. So if you have a small team and your CEO is the speaker and he's the one that would typically be traveling for an event, it's a lot less of his time required to just simply log in and present. So I would say it's a really good thing that we're taking advantage of right now. I can't necessarily address it from the hosting event standpoint. I know that there's different opinions on that, so I definitely welcome kind of Chris and Jess's input there.
Yeah, Chris, what have you seen so far about our new worlds of virtual events that we are literally participating in right now?
So I'll be honest, I'm kind of torn on this, guys. So I joined a company, Patient Ping, that did 56 events in a year, in-person events. The healthcare tech space is very person-to-person oriented, and while 56 events I think is a little bit too much, the event channel is still very important from the overall marketing mix. And I'm struggling. Like, I'm not sold that a virtual event, which is usually presented at the same cost as an in-person event, is worth that investment. I think it's just, maybe I'm too old school. Maybe I need to like think through and like, I'd love to learn from you guys and like how things are going. Like, I know like attendance rates are off the charts when it comes to virtual events, but are they really engaged? Who knows? So that's what I kind of struggle with. So I'm really like looking forward to hearing from you guys and taking some input from you.
Yeah, I mean, to the question of are they more valuable than in person, I'd say at least from a sponsorship standpoint, NFW at the moment, we have tried, and it's almost like the same year ABM platforms were created, everybody just adopted them and started using them as if we knew how to do that, or that the functionality was there. And like, nobody really knows how to do this well right now. Lots of good ideas, and a lot of providers are trying to figure out how to optimize. But as an example, we sponsored an event, we had a virtual booth, we had our digital content library and our demo. And as people come in, we think they're engaging with us and like we're getting good leads and hey, this might even be better, blah, blah, blah. And then on the back end, we realize the conferences incentivize the attendees to go and grab content in order to get prizes. And so it was sort of completely taking the concept of quality out, or we still had to work very hard to figure out what quality was. And there was almost no engagement at the booth, no like pop in. And even though the infrastructure was there, people aren't comfortable with it yet. And so those direct conversations and relationship building opportunities, they're not very polished yet. They're not really there yet. And so at least from a digital sponsorship standpoint, I'm really missing those opportunities to have a one-on-one conversation that is a little bit more natural. You can be selective about whose badge you scan based on the quality of the conversation in person, but you can't be selective about who takes your digital content. So I think there's just like, there's a long way to go. I think they're here forever. And I think we need to continue to test and figure out what works for us, but by no means a replacement at the moment. Hosting your own virtual events. We haven't done a day-long event, but we've done extended webinars and different formats that we've rolled across different timeframes. And I think that's just equivalent to whether webinars work or not. And roughly they do, you know, and you have to do them and they're a necessary evil, but nothing for me currently is replacing physical events.
Yeah, I have a controversial opinion on this. I absolutely hate those digital booths that you were talking about. I find them very weird, and yeah, obviously they're not anything like an in-person discussion that you would have at a booth, whereas yeah, I just don't personally see the value in them as much, but I do understand the value of, yeah, a digital event, which is a little bit more like an extended webinar or something like that. You know, Climacell hosted last week a day-long digital event, and it went really well. I can tell you, I know that the organizers of Startup Boston have talked about how, you know, doing this digitally similarly had far more registrants. So I don't know what any of you think about like that concept of like, it drives a lot of engagement online. Is it enough? Like, is that enough to like of a benefit to outweigh the drawbacks?
I think it's super easy to escape. Someone brought this up earlier. And I think, you know, when you look at this holistically, you have to look at the sales involvement in these things as well. It's not just can marketing produce it and get people to register, but how does sales facilitate relationship building around it? And I think that it's almost impossible to build relationships for sales. I mean, it's almost like the how do you say it? The host is rejecting the organ. Like the sales team does not want to play ball in this at all. It's just not the world they know. They can't have a casual conversation. They can't walk around and find their own people. You know, we call that sharking at my last company, where you would show up at an event. You wouldn't stay at your booth. You'd go find people. You'd look at their badges, and it was very effective actually as a pipeline source. We had sharking at events. So, you know, you look at it comprehensively, and this is not a win for marketing or sales at the moment. We haven't quite figured it out.
Yeah, I think too, just as we go through these different channels that we've discussed, Google, LinkedIn, et cetera, right? Virtual events are just another trade-off because you have to make in your budget. And like, would you rather try a virtual event for 15, 20K, whatever it is? Or would you rather invest that in a known channel right now in these uncertain times, like a LinkedIn or like a Google Ads or an email campaign or something like that? It's just given the trade-off that we as marketers have to make in startups with our budgets, like, I think virtual events are just risky right now. And I'd rather do something that's more stable and more well-known and that's getting return already, and just invest more into that.
That makes sense.
I'm thinking about, and this is, I'm interested in other people's feedback, but as we look at 2021 and we know this is somewhat here to stay, some of the things that I would have not done in the past would have been a bigger sponsorship that's more branding and just awareness and your logos everywhere. I would have always shied away from those opportunities just because they were too expensive for the stage that I was at. But for next year, I'm looking at continuing our webinar calendar, hosting our own first virtual event so we can learn from that. But then just going huge on a digital event like a Gartner Forum or something that is known to pull a higher quality attendance, and really just playing around with those branding and awareness investments that I didn't have the opportunity to in the past. But with all these trade-offs, you can maybe afford to make one or two big bets. And so I'm interested if other people are thinking that way.
Interesting, Justin. We haven't, we're still kind of getting into that planning stage for next year, but what are you finding? Because I haven't looked closely. The Gartner events are notoriously very expensive to attend. Are they cutting their budgets back because it's digital, or are they still asking for the same investment as they would for in-person? Do you have that?
Out of all of the silver linings of COVID, Gartner is willing to wheel and deal right now, which is like never the case before. So I do think there are opportunities to play around with things that you would have not been able to get into. I mean, in years past, it would have cost 60 grand just to get a 10 by 10 booth in no man's land at Gartner. And now, like, if you punch up a little bit to 100 grand, you're going to be in a great scenario from a branding perspective. And I know that's still too much for a lot of people, but yes, definitely efficiencies to be had because people recognize the value isn't fully there in that format yet.
Yeah, well, that's great then, to the point about, like, you know, testing and experimenting as they grow. And that's still, if you're looking at something that's 8, 9, 10 months away, I think that the technology and how they're operating these events are only going to get better, you would expect anyways.
Yeah, I think it's a great point that not doing your usual events has freed up budgets. You can try some different things, whether that's your own digital event or just, yeah, doubling down your LinkedIn ads. It just gives everyone a little bit more flexibility to try new things, which is pretty exciting. So that is all of my controversial opinions for all of you, but we actually have some questions from the audience. First, we're going to do some kind of like a live call-in from a couple of people, which is exciting. We'll see how this goes.
And so I'm going to bring Eileen on, who has a question. So Eileen, let me know when you are, okay, we see you with no picture, but you're here. While Eileen comes off, hi Eileen, while she's getting ready, just as a reminder, there's a Slido link, so please put your questions there. I've seen some people already putting questions there, and we're gonna get to those too. So just, you don't have to be the live call in. We are gonna handle a lot of the questions from Slido as well. So Eileen, did you wanna jump in and ask your question for the panel?
Sure. Hey, can you guys hear me?
Hi, Eileen.
Hey. Yeah, just as a quick introduction, I'm a digital marketing manager at a company called Zerto, disaster recovery and data backup. And, you know, based in Boston, in case anyone else is. So I guess many of us will be, but I also expect this to be a global event. And my question was, you know, oftentimes we hear a lot about like content is king and, you know, there's a lot about that. And one of the things that people say is like, they're always like, the more that you can publish to your blog, the better. So I'm just going to kind of keep it there. I know that we touched on a lot of things that might be related to that and, you know, just kind of try to not lead it too much.
Yeah, I'll start off. And I think that, again, it's kind of reiterates a lot of the messages that we've already shared. It's from my perspective anyways, it's quality over quantity. When you're working at a smaller company and you don't necessarily have a dedicated content team, you only have so many resources, and to produce quality content, it takes time. So you really need to, I think through and be strategic about the types of content that you're producing, and is it going to have the ROI that you want? If you're going to pull, you know, one of two marketers, if you're going to take their time to produce that content, I think it's important that it's really quality.
Yeah, I agree with quality, but I also think as much as you possibly can get published off your site is something people don't think about as much as, oh, I'm just going to crank out content on my blog and I've got my editorial calendar and let's go. You know, it really is important that you reach outside your audience and find either partner blogs that you can be a part of or publish on your blog, partner blogs, you know, find content, share programs, and find ways to get yourselves published. Contributed articles are another good idea. You always want to keep a hold of your keywords and what you're optimizing for, and volume against that is never going to be a bad thing, but placing it all on your property would not best serve you. You need to think about how you distribute that content across a variety of properties.
Yeah,
I would just add one thing around kind of like the shelf life of your blog content, if you will. So is your blog a place where content just goes to die? Or can you repackage and repurpose that content into different assets or different materials? So as an example, we had a series of blog posts on Patient Ping about a recent compliance mandate that came down from the government. What we did was, instead of just having that on the blog, we then, a couple of months later, repackaged all of that into LinkedIn posts, into ebooks, into a deck, recycling content again and again and again, and not just having it live in one type of medium. So if you have a great blog and there's a ton of content on it and it's not getting a ton of traffic, you know what, like repurpose it, repackage it into different mediums that people can use. Tweet out a couple of links about it, tweet out, or, you know, put it on LinkedIn as well, do LinkedIn posts. So like your blog is like a great kind of like a holding pen almost for your content, right? In one aspect, and then use it for that. Just continue to iterate on it and try different means of promoting that content through different channels.
Yeah, I think, you know, use it as a data-driven machine too. So whatever you have produced in your blog, people often forget to go, and whether it's HubSpot or another, whatever, look at what the top read blogs are. Everybody should have search embedded in their blog experience. So what are people searching for? What are the null results? You know, use that as a way to steer what you're creating for content. And then once you know you've got your right topics, then also think about where else to get it placed. But I think people overlook the source of intelligence that a blog actually is for your content strategy.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. And I love the idea, especially that you talked about, Chris, of like getting all different value out of your blog content, turning into different assets. I think that's super useful, especially with anyone who has a small team. And so I think we have one other person who's going to pop on for a question, correct?
Thanks, Eileen. Oh, Christine's muted.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. Thank you, Eileen, for the question. So Kara, if you can take a question from Slido while I get our other live caller, that would be great.
Sure. So let's see. Oh, we have a very controversial question here, which get ready, guys. Should brands get political? Is there a framework brands can use to determine whether to take the risk?
I think this is a fascinating question. I was eyeing it and I was wondering if you were going to ask it. I'll give you an honest opinion. I think that when a political issue is ripe and it may or may not affect your culture of your organization, I think you need to be ready to state something publicly. You know, and I think Black Lives Matters is a really good opportunity for organizations to look at themselves and not just this moment in time, but forever in the future. Are we inclusive? Are we thinking about inclusivity in how we create our companies, build our culture, how we recruit, all of those things? And that's really important as a cultural value to, you know, I wouldn't want to bucket this completely, but younger generations are much more values-based generally. So I'll go out there and say it. And so when you're recruiting talent, you know, and you're building your organization, there are times where you need to be really mindful of the climate, economic, social, or otherwise. And you have to be willing to go a bit out on a limb in a way that's uncomfortable, and you may receive negative feedback, but if it's aligned to your cultural values, you need to be ready to participate in the conversation. And typically that's a C-level decision to be made and a conversation to be driven from. I would never pull it through my general marketing activities because it is too polarizing and it's not our place as a corporation. But that's my sort of answer on that question.
Yeah, Nicole or Chris?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Obviously, befitting of the times. I think there's a couple of things we, as companies or as marketers, we have to be mindful of. First and foremost, not everybody may agree with you or your company's stance. Particularly if you're if you're selling nationally, there's different pockets of the country. We all know the red-blue divide, and you have to be very, very careful you don't alienate your customers or your prospects based on a political stance that you make. So I think you have to be somewhat careful and maybe, you know, unite behind the cause it's presenting, maybe not so much the organization that's pushing it. I think too, we have to also be very, very careful of not coming across as genuine and just almost like pandering. I think brands get a lot of pushback, particularly from the younger generation, millennials, et cetera, where it just doesn't feel authentic, that they're just doing it. They're throwing up a rainbow logo because they want to throw up a rainbow logo to celebrate Gay Pride Month. So there's a very, very fine line to walk there. But I really like what Jeff said about like, definitely do not incorporate it into your daily marketing activity or your daily operations, because it can boomerang very, very quickly. I actually worked at a company back in the day called Carbonite. We had one of our most successful channels was Rush Limbaugh in terms of endorsement radio. And there was a whole sort of backlash about that. And again, this was like, gosh, probably 8-10 years ago. But there was a definite backlash around that from both his listeners and then people on the other side of the spectrum. And so it was a difficult situation to navigate, and it did impact the business for sure.
I'd agree with everything they've said, and you have to be really cautious too, especially if you've got customers or prospects that are in the government space. So you need to really treat these types of topics really delicately. And I think to kind of build on what Jess said as well, it's a lot of this it's a C-level decision. And I think that making sure that you're working internally with the CEO and the other kind of key stakeholders, and making sure that internally you're addressing some of these sensitivities and kind of social issues or political issues, and understanding how as a company you want to even handle them internally, I think is an important thing to think about as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, that there were a lot of companies that were called out for being disingenuous in supporting a movement externally, and we're not doing anything about it internally. So I think that's a great thing to keep in mind. Do we have our next question?
You, Kara. Pardees is on video now. Pardees, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes. Hello, everybody. Can you all hear me? I'm excited.
Yeah.
Yay. So my name is Pardees. I am the CEO and founder of Albaloo, which is a digital agency for startup companies looking to scale their revenue and marketing. My question for everybody is, should you force your customers to follow a rigid marketing process, or create a flexible process that allows them to engage what they want? What works best for you?
I'd say we're very flexible right now too. We know we're we're very flexible. We are a small growing organization. We're still understanding our personas, our buyers, our mapping our customer journey. And I think to start, you need to be flexible, and you need to find out what works for them. And I don't think that kind of a rigid process, while it's important to have, key milestones in the funnel to be able to track that journey, I think that being flexible is really key.
Yeah, I think you need to meet them where they're at. And so that could mean finding them on other properties off your site, or it could mean making sure you have live chat on your site if they choose to engage with you that way. You need to be mindful about gating and ungating content per this topic too, who's ready and willing to give you information versus not. So how do you get those very early curiosity people engaged? I also think about it in terms of, there are times that you should know about your buyer or potential customer. When they're doing a certain action, you should be thinking about what their next action likely is to be, and being helpful on that. It doesn't mean you're trying to force them down a funnel of an experience, but for instance, if you've downloaded our software for free, I know you're going to want help deploying. That's going to be your first question. Maybe some people don't need it, but offering valuable content about deployment first, followed by optimization, and making sure they know about these features, those should be helpful additions that might look like you're trying to take them through a specific funnel, but you're based on assumptions and knowing those behaviors from previous free users and what they would want. So I think it's okay to be a little bit in both, finding ways to meet them where they're at and being available and offering value. But once you establish a context over someone, then I think it's okay to try and take them through what you believe is a helpful process.
Yeah, I think handholding them through like a free trial process is great. I think though at some point, flexibility, and this is the difference probably between a Series A and a Series C, is that with scale comes chaos. And if there's not a formal kind of funnel, you're going to quickly lose control of your lead progression, and that'll lead to a poor experience for the customer or the prospect themselves. So there's a fine line, and there's a dipping point between letting them you being very flexible and kind of like responding in almost in an ad hoc fashion versus putting them on a regimented path. And what that tipping point is, it's going to depend on your business and the volume that you do right now.
I think that's great, Chris. I totally agree. I think that it's just making sure you build the right funnel and journey for your audience and your customers. So ideally, you get to that stage where it is a little bit, more rigid to some, not necessarily rigid, but a little bit more process oriented. I think that's a great point.
Structured.
Yeah.
Yeah, structure. Yeah.
Yeah, this is exactly why it's so great. We have people from all different stages of growth. Just show like, okay, you start off early, you don't need it, but as you grow, you do. Mm-hmm. So it's a wonderful perspective. Let's see, we have another question that was upvoted, which actually, Chris, you talked a little bit about the various agencies that you work with. So what areas of marketing are worth outsourcing to agencies, and what areas is it a terrible idea for you to outsource to an agency?
Great question. So I think some of the more general marketing functions, so things like PR, communications, search engine marketing, design. Design's a little bit trickier, but I think those are the three that come to mind immediately. I don't think, particularly like if you're in a specialized industry like I am, which is healthcare, like outsourcing content to an agency, content creation is really, really difficult if it's a specialized niche where you need like 5+ years, 10+ years of experience in that space. So the more general stuff though, like search engine marketing, right? Like you can provide them with the keywords, you know the industry, the knowledge, but let them do the bidding. Maybe they can do some ad copywriting for you and you can just tweak that. Let them do the reporting and following up. Let them do the research on the competitive landscape for you. But to have one person on your marketing team do that, I think is just, particularly for starting, like I said, we're Series C. Actually, I didn't even have that at a publicly traded company either. Like we always outsourced our search engine marketing just because it's too routine and it's too important. It's not important enough to dedicate, I shouldn't say that. It's more important to have another person on your team that can do a different function rather than managing paid search.
I agree with what Chris said. I've gone farther into outsourcing. I have a squad of people that I've grown to know and trust for specific things. So I'm actually able to outsource product marketing, flex at periods of time, which I previously would have never said you should outsource product marketing, but for specific projects, I can do that. I also outsource win-loss analysis at this point. There's a great company called Double Check. And you would think you should never let go of win-loss analysis because that's such important intelligence for you. You shouldn't let a third party handle it. But I've actually found this third party gets a lot more information than we would internally, just sort of trusting sales or using our own assumptions about this. When you separate from your corporation to try to get that intelligence, I find that gives you really great insights that are more actionable and more true than your own win-loss analysis. But I would never outsource competitive intelligence as a function. So just as a slice of competitive intelligence, win-loss analysis, I found a way to get that done more efficiently and in a higher quality way. But otherwise, I would never outsource product marketing and competitive, but I found some people that I can trust. And I think that if you're working for a startup and you like that work and so you plan to continue, you have to find people that you can consider as part of your squad, that you know their intelligence, you know their quality of work, because the more you outsource, the more you are managing outsourced partners. And there's a point at which it breaks down unless you have awesome partners whose work you can trust.
We're currently outsourcing digital marketing and design needs. So I think that is something that can be a little bit more that you can have out of house, I think works okay. I would just, again, caution with PR. I think it's great to have external firms. For a small team, I think a contractor is a great way to go. I think you'll get more bang for your buck and not be paying the kind of high fees associated with those models where you have to pay, for the account management and all those sorts of pieces. But yeah, so I'd agree with kind of what they said overall.
Yeah, I actually have a question that's really for you, Nicole, from the audience. Any tips on how to best develop a marketing strategy for an early stage, pre-seed stage startup? Which areas of marketing should we focus on first?
So pre-seed. All right. So that's tough. I think it depends on the industry and the vertical. When we think about what we did as an organization for Dust Identity, so I actually was brought in pre-seed as a contractor to help support the seed A round and kind of the announcement around that. So, and that was really effective for our brand and audience. We had a very kind of rough website at the time, and that was really the only piece of marketing that was in place, I would say. So they brought me in and we did a big kind of PR push around the seed round. Again, I guess this is why I'm advocating for a contractor. I think you can get a lot done with a contractor as a resource. So we did, we put it all kind of invested in PR, which can make a really big impact depending on the industry, I think. And if you're ready to announce a seed round, I would advocate for starting maybe PR first.
Yeah, it's great advice. We're really rolling through these questions. It's awesome to see such great engagement from everyone right now. So here's another question. You all mentioned young teams. What can an older or more experienced person do to show that they can add value to a startup?
Yeah, I think what Chris said earlier about standing out really applies in that scenario, because if you are older and more experienced, you have more to bring, more experience to lend. So going the extra mile and doing something like he mentioned, I noticed this about your competitor, showing something on the entry, I think shows grit and the ability to do extra work before you know if it's going to pan out. Because I think what you have to take off the table, if you've been working for large companies your whole career, you have to take off the table the feeling that you're not a cultural fit at a young company where people have to wear a million hats. Because the perception is that you would be a person who's been in specific roles with a lot of support around you to get things done. Like, let's say you were in charge of content here, but you worked for a big company. So we know somebody else actually did the writing, somebody else actually did the design, and you may have been an orchestrator, but not the soup to nuts person. And so I think if you're coming from a context which is only large companies in your later stage in your career, you have to bring across passion for young company and why. You have to offer some unique value, and you just really have to take off the table the perception that will exist that you might not have the grit, or you might not have the roll up your sleeves, get it done mentality that's required at young companies.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And, don't come across as a delegator, right? Which I think was exactly what Jess was saying about if you ran content in a big company, we know that there's different content writers, somebody else does the design, but like you have to own it from soup to nuts. I really like that expression. That's really, it is. But like, just because you're a little bit older doesn't mean you don't offer value. Like there's a need in startups for like that kind of like mature approach and that experience level where you've seen things that have failed, you know how to come back from failure. So like play that up as well. Like your experience is an asset. It really is. It's just that to the point made, like your personality and your enthusiasm and your overall like demeanor has to show that you're into the startup world.
Yeah, anything you'd like to add, Nicole? Oh, actually, I think.
Sorry, I lost video, guys. But I'm still here. Yeah, I think, I think I agree with everything they said. And as much as, being in a startup environment requires you to be kind of dynamic and agile and able to kind of flex, as we talked about earlier, I think that there's a lot of value in somebody who can bring the experience and processes as well to say, these are things that work. And while they have to be, fluid and ready to kind of change courses, as needed, having that experience is really valuable. That somebody that can come in and say, I've seen what works, and these are the ways that we made them work before. So I think that's there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add actually is I always love to see if someone has a side project that is a little more startup-y. That's a great way to prove that you can do the work at a startup, even if maybe your whole career was enterprise or in a completely different industry.
It's funny that you say that, because I agree if you're looking at a person who works for a big company who has a side hustle, but it's actually a red flag to me when I'm looking at someone who consistently works for startups and side hustles, because I'm like, oh God, when are they going to be working on my stuff? Because that takes 110% of their time. I know it. So
that's a good point. Yeah. If they're like actual passion project is building their own business, then that could be a red flag too. Oh, see, so many controversies, so little time. So I think I actually think we went through all of our questions, unless we have any other last minute ones from the audience right now. I just like refresh the page here. Let's see.
Sarah, there is the one about what skills, strategy, and platforms would you suggest to someone interested in making a career change into digital or social marketing?
There we go. One more.
I think that you can, it depends on what your context is. If you're in event marketing and you want to move to digital and social, I think that there are lightweight classes you can take that are going to give you a little bit of a certification badge. I mean, I think one easy way to transition in is go and take a HubSpot inbound certification class. Might cost a little bit of money, but I think if you want to make any change, you have to figure out a little bit of skill transition or building before you are applicable for that role. And those certifications can tend to be meaningful. I look for them when I'm looking for a specific skill set. So I would think about trying to get some certifications from HubSpot as an easy place to start to move yourself in that direction.
Yeah, great. I don't have anything to add to that. That's exactly what I was going to say. Like HubSpot certifications. Maybe LinkedIn may have a couple of courses as well now, but
yeah, and Google Ads
there.
too. Google Ads, you can do some certification there too. So I think, yep.
Yeah, those are all great advice. I know.
I like your competitive topic, Kara. Do we have 2 more minutes?
Oh yeah, we can. So we did pull a topic out because we weren't sure we would have time, but we have a couple more minutes. So one last controversial opinion for the people who are still on the call, because you guys are the best for sticking around. The controversial idea is ignore your competitors. So yeah, obviously, Jess, you have strong feelings on this.
I'm actually like sweating because there's something going on with a competitor right now that, you know, I've been thinking about all morning. And so I'm on the spectrum of, I'm very focused on what the competition is doing. I'm not dragging my team through it. I think that's the mistake, is to move the puck constantly based on what a competitor is doing and drag your team through it. But as the leader of your function, you need to be on it and you need to see all of their moves. And when necessary, you need to say to your digital person, okay, we need to do this in Google right now, you know, because this has happened and they can't do that, you know? So, so I'm all over it personally. I also just like it. I think it's fun.
What about it is fun for you? Actually, I'm just interested.
Winning is fun. Winning is very fun for me. So I think that if you want to win, you have to beat the competition, and that's kind of basic. Yeah.
That makes sense.
And I think you simply can't ignore your competitors, because there's a lot you can learn, and you need it's critical, I think, to know what's going on and be aware of it. But I love Jess's point about not making it all, you know, consuming for the entire team. I think that's also important.
Yeah, I would just say, like, be mindful of your competitor. There's certain things that you can see in Google Ads or their website, press releases, their press pickups and articles. But also talk to your sales team, particularly around closed one, and if you actually did lose to a competitor, and really try to understand why that happened. Just don't rely on like press clippings or something that you know, the sales team. Make sure that you get a good sense and pulse of the market to see how they're doing in the kind of head-to-head battle with your competitors, because maybe there's an angle there for you to leverage in your marketing.
Yeah. And I think, you know, when you're thinking about growing your career and having a strategic impact on the business, there is always a healthy level of paranoia at the C level about competition. So it's never a bad idea to be aware of what's going on with the competition, and being able to contribute to ideas around it. I think that's going to up-level your visibility.
And Chris's point too is thinking about the sales team, right? Like, the last thing you want is for them to get onto a sales call and not know of some competitor. So having that competitive intelligence and making sure that they're equipped to know who, you know, what's happening in the competitive space is really important.
Yeah, you gotta have that card for them.
Definitely. I think too, we just came out of the summer is usually a slower month for people, right? And so that's when we spend time like really deep diving into our competitors. So in August, we did a good dive into their approach and what we've heard from and what the market's hearing from them. And then you package that up and you have it for the latter half of this year. So it's you know, you can pick and choose your times when to deep dive, and then but also I agree with what everybody said. Like, you got to keep the pulse of your competitors. You can't just ignore them.
Yeah, I love that. That's one that everyone actually agrees on. I think that's the only opinion that we all were like, yes, you can't ignore your competitors. So I think the moral of that story is don't listen to inspirational posts on LinkedIn. Those are not actual business advice. People who are in the—
I think it's like, don't listen to Jeff Bezos. I think he's number one. That's like, he never watches his competition. And here comes Walmart, by the way, Bezos. So
true. Well, I think we are going to wrap it up then, correct?
We are. So we've got just a couple of minutes left until 1:15. And so I did want to ask all of you before we let you go. So given how polarizing some of these topics are, but when you're in a startup, you have to make a decision one way or the other. And so what do you all do when you're faced with something that you think one way and the CEO thinks another way, or you've got some polarizing opinion. How do you put the stake in the ground and say, this is the direction we're going to follow?
I can answer that. It comes back to competitive, actually, because I think I've never met a CEO who isn't, pretty aware of competition and fired up when someone does something, even though it has no real bearing on us. But there are moments where there is a real bearing, and you have to suss that out, and you have to be agile. So we've done some things where it's like overnight we've spun up a new web page because we knew something was happening, and that needed to happen. And that web page has performed really well for us. We've actually generated a lot of leads and traffic on it. But then there are moments where we hear of a small announcement and we think maybe we should announce something instead, or ahead of them. And there are times where, we would really be shortchanging ourselves to be reactive on a specific announcement at that moment in time to the competitor. And so I think you have to think about give and get and picking your battles and what's important and what's not, and build your strong conviction around it. And then stay true to that. And you have to be strong in your communication on why. And I think people are reasonable if you're working with good people, at least. And so I think that's it. Sometimes you should, in this particular case with a competitor, be reactive. It's necessary, and you got to pull your team through it. And the rest of the time when it's not, stay true to yourself and then have solid communication with your CEO.
Yeah, I think when we had the topic earlier about ungated content, and so my team and I debated that, right? And so I try to use data as much as possible to kind of make the decision and not just go by opinion, and which is hard to do in a startup because there's a lot of opinions in startups. The founders, CEO, C-level people usually have like the strongest opinions, but there's no reason why you can't use data if it's available to push back and say, you know what, maybe your perspective on this is a little bit different, and have you considered this? Like, here's some data that I can show you based on our own experiences here with whatever the topic might be. So if you can use data, have data be your ally, and then try not to just, what I don't like is when the person that shouts the loudest kind of gets their way. That's really not good leadership or effectiveness. I think it's all about bringing it back to the data as best you can, and then but ultimately, if you don't have the data, you're the leader of your function. And if it's a marketing call, then you got to make that call based on your experience. But make the decision. Don't be indecisive, right? Like that's the other thing I think is really like morale killing, is when the same topic circles and circles and circles and circles and it never gets landed. So be decisive and make your decision, even if you don't have the data to do it. Get opinions, synthesize them, and then make the call. Don't just let it hang out there.
I saw someone just popped up a message in the chat, which I think is what you guys are speaking to, is that this is an opportunity to teach C-level and CEOs as well. I think that, this is, to your point, Chris, like we're the lead of the function, and you should have that conviction and come in with and be able to communicate why you think something is the right approach. And what I was going to say was, that piece of around indecision. I think that's really critical, is being indecisive and not making a decision can be detrimental. And again, I think a lot of these topics that we've gone through, there's testing you can do and experimenting with these. There's not a lot of these areas will not, if you decide gated content versus not gated. I mean, there's a lot of things you can test, and if you just make the decision, and if it's not working for you, you can change it. You can switch gears, and that's the great thing about whether it's Google Ads or adding more content to a blog, or trying new things that's getting more traffic into your more traffic into the top of your funnel. There's a lot of things you can do to experiment, and there's not a lot of harm done by trying something and then reflecting and looking at the data and saying, you're right, that maybe that didn't work and we made the wrong call, but we can adjust and make those pivot pretty quickly.
I had one other experience with a CEO who was like an idea factory, previous CEO, and a very classic multiple time founder who kind of was used to running the show and maybe even running marketing at points of time in different companies' trajectory. So A, he knew enough to be dangerous about the function. He had good instincts. B, he was just a creative individual, which is excellent. But as you build your team over time, like, I remember my team said to me at one point in time, this was eye-opening, like, we have to be allowed to finish things. And that was an eye-opening moment for me on marketing leadership overall, and how you do need to protect the team from the idea factory. And that might be from the CEO, or it might be from sales, which right now we're getting a lot of ideas from sales because these people are grounded and they've got a lot of time on their hands. And that's been a challenge by itself. But it's great to have people who want to contribute ideas, but you do have to be firm in sussing out what is and is not the right ideas, or is not part of the program right now, so that your team can operate.
And I think that brings up the great point of, like, the all of the asks, I find that marketing gets, especially from sales, right? Like, we need this, we need this, we need this, and you have to step back and say, what can we actually execute on, and what makes the most sense.